scratching started at 2:47 a.m., and it wasn't coming from outside my truck. I'd pulled into a rest area off Highway 80 in Nebraska for my mandatory 8-hour break. Everything was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the gentle rumble of my diesel engine cooling down. That's when I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from behind me, from inside my trailer. Scratch, 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 like fingernails dragging across metal. The name's Buck, and I've been hauling freight for 23 years. I've carried everything from live chickens to military equipment, and I thought I'd seen it all. Today I'm telling you a story that still keeps me awake at night, 3 months after it happened. A story about a load I should never have taken and cargo that wasn't what it seemed to be. It all started when my dispatcher called me with a rush job. High-paying run from a warehouse in Chicago to a research facility in Denver. The money was too good to pass up, 3 times my usual rate for a simple cross-country haul. All I had to do was pick up a sealed trailer, drive it west, and deliver it without opening the doors. The manifest said machine parts, sensitive equipment that couldn't be jostled or exposed to temperature changes. That's why the trailer was climate controlled and why I couldn't open it to check the load. Made sense to me. I'd hauled plenty of delicate machinery before. The pickup went smooth. The warehouse guys had the trailer ready to go, all sealed up with heavy-duty locks and tamper-proof seals. The paperwork was in order, the weight was legal, and the customer had already wired the payment to my account. Easy money, or so I thought. The first few hours on the road were normal. The trailer pulled well, no problems with the weight distribution. My mirrors showed the climate control unit humming along on top of the trailer, keeping whatever was inside at a steady temperature. I made good time through Illinois and Iowa, stopping only for fuel and food. But somewhere around Des Moines, things started to feel wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, just a feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. The trailer seemed to be shifting more than it should, like the cargo was moving around back there. That was strange because machine parts are usually crated and secured pretty well. By the time I hit Nebraska, the movement had gotten worse. Every time I took a curve or changed lanes, I could feel the load shifting. It wasn't dangerous. The truck was still handling fine, but it was odd. Machine parts don't usually move around like that. That's when I decided to pull over for my break. I needed to get some sleep, and maybe in the morning, whatever was going on back there would settle down. I found a quiet rest area with good lighting and parked away from the other trucks. I was just settling into my sleeper berth when the scratching started. At first, I thought it might be tree branches scraping against the trailer roof. The wind was picking up, and there were some big oak trees near the parking area. But when I looked out my window, the branches weren't even close to my truck. The sound came again. Scratch, 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 definitely from inside the trailer. I climbed out of my cab and walked around to the back of the truck. The scratching stopped as soon as I got close to the doors. I put my ear against the metal and listened. Nothing, just the hum of the climate control unit. Maybe some piece of equipment had come loose and was rubbing against the wall when the trailer moved. It happened sometimes with poorly secured loads. I checked the seals on the doors. They were intact. Whatever was making the noise, I couldn't get to it without breaking the seals and voiding my contract. I went back to my cab and tried to get some sleep. But every time I started to drift off, the scratching would start again. It wasn't random either. It came in patterns, like something was deliberately making the noise. 3 quick scratches, then a pause. 3 more scratches, then another pause. By 4 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I started my engine and got back on the road, hoping the movement would stop whatever was making the noise. For a while it worked. The highway was smooth, and the trailer rode quietly behind me. But when I stopped for fuel in North Platte, the scratching started again as soon as I turned off the engine. This time it was louder. And it wasn't just scratching. I could hear something else. A soft thumping sound, like something was moving around in there. The attendant at the truck stop noticed me standing by my trailer. "Everything okay, driver?" "Yeah, just checking my load," I said. "You hear anything unusual?" He listened for a moment, but the trailer was quiet. "Sounds normal to me. What kind of freight you carrying?" "Machine parts," I said. "Climate-controlled stuff." He nodded and went back to his work, but I noticed he kept glancing at my trailer with a strange expression on his face. Back on the road, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Long hauls can mess with your head sometimes. You start hearing things that aren't there, seeing things in your peripheral vision. But the scratching was real. I could feel it through the floor of my cab when it got really intense. Around noon, I stopped for lunch at a truck stop in Sterling, Colorado. I was only about an hour from my delivery point, and I was ready to get this load off my truck. While I was eating, another driver came over to my table. "You're the guy with the blue Kenworth, right? Trailer with the white climate unit." "That's me," I said. "Buddy, I don't know what you're hauling back there, but it's making some weird noises. I was parked next to you for about 10 minutes, and I kept hearing this scratching sound. Sounded like something was trying to get out. My blood went cold. If other people were hearing it too, then it wasn't just my imagination." "What do you think it could be?" I asked. He shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be anything. But if I were you, I want to know what was in that trailer." The problem was I couldn't know. The seals were still intact, and my contract specifically forbade opening the trailer doors. But the scratching was getting worse, and now there was something else, a sound like breathing. Deep, slow breaths that seemed to come through the walls of the trailer. I finished my lunch and walked back to my truck. As I approached the trailer, the sound stopped, but I could swear I felt something watching me from inside. It was crazy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in there knew I was nearby. The final leg of the trip was the worst hour of my driving career. The scratching became constant, joined by thumping and what sounded like scraping metal. My trailer was rocking slightly, like something large was moving around inside. Other drivers on the highway started giving me a wide berth, probably because my truck was behaving strangely. When I finally reached the delivery address, I was shocked. It wasn't a research facility like I'd expected. It was just a small warehouse on the outskirts of Denver, surrounded by a chain-link fence. No signs, no company name, just an address number on a plain metal building. The receiving dock was already open when I backed up to it. 3 men in white coveralls were waiting for me, along with some kind of specialized equipment I didn't recognize. They worked quickly to break the seals and open the trailer doors. I couldn't see inside from my cab, but I heard one of the men say, "It's still alive." Good. We were worried about the sedative wearing off. Sedative? Machine parts don't need sedatives. Before I could ask any questions, one of the men came to my window with a clipboard and a thick envelope. "Sign here for delivery," he said. "And here's a bonus for the quick turnaround." The envelope was full of cash, more money than I'd ever seen at one time. But it didn't feel right. What exactly was I carrying? I asked. The man looked at me with cold eyes. "Machine parts, like your manifest said. Nothing more, nothing less." "And driver, this delivery never happened. You were never here. The company that hired you doesn't exist." "Understand." I understood. I took the money, signed the papers, and got out of there as fast as I could. But as I was pulling away, I glanced in my mirror and saw them wheeling something out of my trailer on a covered gurney. Something big enough to be a person. That was 3 months ago. I've tried to forget about it, try to convince myself it really was just machine parts making those noises. But sometimes, late at night when I'm sleeping in my cab, I still hear that scratching sound. And I wonder what kind of machine needs sedatives to keep it quiet. I never took another high-paying mystery load after that. Some cargo is worth more than money, and some deliveries cost more than you're willing to pay. The roads taught me a lot of lessons over the years, but that one's the most important. Always know what you're hauling, because sometimes the cargo is more dangerous than you think. And sometimes it's still alive. The interstate stretched out ahead of me, like a black ribbon under the star-filled sky. I've been driving for 6 hours straight, hauling a load of auto parts from Detroit to Memphis. My name's Jake, and I've been trucking these highways for 12 years. I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. I was wrong. It was just past midnight when I first heard the voice on my CB radio. Channel 19 had been quiet for the last hour. Nothing but static and the occasional trucker checking in with his dispatcher. Then this voice cut through the white noise, clear as day. Eastbound 18-wheeler at mile marker 342. You got your ears on? I glanced at my odometer. Mile marker 342 was coming up in about 2 miles. I key my mic. This is eastbound Jake in the blue Peterbilt. Go ahead. Jake, this is Road Dog. You better slow her down, buddy. Got a jackknifed semi about 3 miles ahead, blocking 2 lanes. Smokey's already on scene, but traffic's backing up fast. I squinted through my windshield. The road ahead looked clear, but it was dark. Maybe I just couldn't see the accident yet. I eased off the throttle. Much obliged, Road Dog. What's your 20? Static answered me. I tried again, but got nothing. Probably just lost the signal. Happens all the time out here. Sure enough, about 3 miles down the road, I saw the flashing lights. A semi had jackknifed across the right 2 lanes, just like Road Dog said. A state trooper was directing traffic around the wreck. I merged into the left lane with a line of other cars and trucks, grateful for the heads up, but something bothered me. When I passed the accident, I looked for Road Dog's truck. There had to be 20 vehicles backed up behind the wreck, but I didn't see any truck that looked like it belonged to someone with that kind of road knowledge. Usually, the guys who give traffic reports are right there in the thick of it. An hour later, Road Dog came back on the radio. Eastbound traffic, this is Road Dog. Got reports of a deer in the roadway around mile marker 380. Big buck, right in the driving lane. Use caution. I check my position. Mile marker 378. I'll be there in a few minutes. I slowed down and kept my eyes peeled. Sure enough, just past mile marker 380, a massive buck was standing in the middle of my lane, staring at my headlights like he owned the highway. I hit my brakes and laid on the horn. The deer bounded off into the woods, and I continued on my way. But again, when I tried to thank Road Dog on the CB, I got nothing but static. This went on for the next 4 hours. Road Dog would come on the radio with warnings about construction zones, disabled vehicles, and speed traps. Every single warning turned out to be accurate. Every single time, he'd disappear when I tried to respond. The thing that really started getting under my skin was how specific his information was. He didn't just say there was construction ahead. He told me exactly which lanes were closed and how long the delays were. He warned me about a state trooper hiding behind an overpass at mile marker 420. And when I passed that spot doing exactly the speed limit, I saw the cop car tucked back in the shadows. By 4 a.m., I was getting seriously spooked. I tried switching to other CB channels, but Road Dog's voice only came through on Channel 19. I tried calling other truckers to ask if they were hearing him too, but the few who answered said their radios had been quiet all night. That's when Road Dog's warnings started getting weird. Jake, this is Road Dog. You need to check your right rear trailer tire. Looking a little low from here. I hadn't told anyone my name since that first conversation hours ago. How did he know it was me he was talking to? And what did he mean, from here? I looked at my mirrors but didn't see any trucks behind me. The highway was empty except for a few cars. At the next truck stop, I walked around my rig with a flashlight. My right rear trailer tire was low, just like he said. Not flat, but definitely losing air. I added some pressure from the air hose and tried to figure out how Road Dog could have seen that in the dark from another truck. Back on the road, Road Dog's voice crackled through the speaker again. Jake, you're looking tired, buddy. Maybe pull over for some coffee. It was a good truck stop at exit 467. I wasn't tired, but something in his voice made my skin crawl. How could he tell I was tired? I was alone in my cab, and it was pitch black outside. Nobody could see me. Road dog, what's your location? I keyed the mic. I like to meet up, buy you a coffee for all the help tonight. Silence. Then, after a long pause, his voice came back, but it sounded different. Strained. Can't do that, Jake. Can't stop. Gotta keep moving. Got to keep watching the road. Where are you headed? Same place as you, Jake. Always the same place. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean, same place? I'm going to Memphis. Mile marker 495, Jake. That's where we're both going. That's where it ends. I checked my trip computer. Mile marker 495 was about 30 miles ahead. My delivery wasn't until noon, but Memphis was still 100 miles past that point. What was at mile marker 495? Road dog, I don't understand. What's at 495? The radio crackled with static. Then his voice came through, barely a whisper. The accident, Jake. The one that happened 5 years ago. The one that's going to happen again. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What accident? What are you talking about? Blue Peterbilt, eastbound. Mile marker 495. Driver fell asleep at the wheel. Never saw the bridge abutment coming. My blood turned to ice water. I was driving a blue Peterbilt, eastbound, and I was getting tired, fighting to keep my eyes open. Road dog, who are you? I'm the one who tried to warn him. Try to warn myself. Been trying for 5 years, Jake. Every night, same route, same warnings. But always ends the same way. The mile markers were counting down. For 90, 491. For 92, I was wide awake now, adrenaline pumping through my veins. It doesn't have to end the same way. I said into the mic, I'm awake. I'm alert. I can change it. That's what I always think, Jake. That's what I always say. Up ahead, I could see the bridge. Just a normal overpass, nothing scary about it. But as I got closer, my eyelids started feeling heavy. The white lines on the road began to blur together. Stay awake, Jake. Road dog's voice pleaded through the radio. Please stay awake. I slapped myself in the face, cranked down the windows, turned up the radio. But the drowsiness was overwhelming like a drug in my system. My eyes wanted to close so badly. The mile marker 495 sign flashed past my window. The bridge was right ahead. My truck started to drift toward the concrete abutment. At the last second, I yanked the wheel hard to the left, fighting against the sleep that tried to claim me. My trailer swayed dangerously, but I kept the truck on the road. I passed under the bridge safely and pulled over on the shoulder, my heart hammering in my chest. I sat there for 20 minutes, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. Then I picked up the CB mic. Road dog, you there? I made it. I'm okay. Silence. I tried again. Road dog, come in. Nothing but static. I never heard from Road dog again. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving that same stretch of highway, I switch my CB to channel 19 and key the mic. Eastbound 18-wheeler at mile marker 342. You got your ears on? I figure maybe someday I'll be the one giving the warnings. Maybe I'll be the voice in the dark, trying to save another driver from making the same mistake I almost made. The road's a lonely place, especially at night. But sometimes the dead don't rest easy. Sometimes they keep on trucking, trying to fix the mistakes they can't undo. I just hope that when my time comes, someone will be listening to their CB radio, ready to heed the warning of a phantom trucker who learned too late that some bridges are harder to cross than others. My name's Diesel, and I've been running freight across this country for 15 years. I've seen plenty of weird stuff on the highways, mirages in the desert, fog so thick you can't see your own hood, ice storms that turn the interstate into a skating rink. But nothing prepared me for what happened on Interstate 40 last Tuesday night. I was hauling a load of furniture from North Carolina to Arizona, running hard to make my delivery deadline. It was around 11 p.m. when I hit that stretch of highway between Little Rock and Oklahoma City. Empty road, clear skies, perfect driving conditions. My GPS showed I had about 300 miles to go before my next fuel stop. I remember passing mile marker 237 because there was a billboard right next to it advertising some truck stop diner called Big Mike's All Night Eats. The sign was old and faded, with a picture of a hamburger that looked like it was painted sometime in the 1980s. I made a mental note that I might stop there if I got hungry later. About 10 minutes down the road, I saw another mile marker coming up. Should have been 238 or maybe 239, depending on how far I traveled. But when my headlights hit the sign, it read mile marker 237. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes. Long hauls can play tricks on your mind sometimes. Maybe I'd been daydreaming and hadn't gone as far as I thought. It happens to the best of us. But then I saw the billboard again. Big Mike's All Night Eats, with that same faded hamburger picture. Same spot on the right side of the road. Same angle, same everything. That's when I started paying closer attention. I checked my odometer, watched my GPS, kept my eyes glued to the road. According to my instruments, I was making good time, cruising at 65 miles per hour. The GPS showed my little truck icon moving steadily west along the interstate. 10 minutes later, mile marker 237 appeared in my headlights again. And again, there was Big Mike's billboard. I pulled over and got out of my cab. The night air was cool and still. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, but I couldn't see any other vehicles. I walked around my truck, checking the tires, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. Everything seemed normal. Back in the cab, I tried calling dispatch on my CB radio. Central Dispatch, this is Diesel and Truck 447. You copy. Static answered me. I tried my cell phone, but there was no signal. Not unusual for this part of the country, but it added to the creepy feeling that was growing in my gut. I put the truck in gear and continued driving. Maybe it was just some kind of mistake with the mile markers. Maybe the state highway department had messed up the signs. There had to be a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. I passed mile marker 237 for the fourth time at 11:47 p.m. I know because I wrote it down in my logbook. The billboard was still there, still advertising Big Mike's place. I started looking for other landmarks to help me figure out what was going on. There's a rest area about 5 miles past the billboard, a small parking lot with some picnic tables and a couple of vending machines. The first time I saw it, I didn't think much about it. The second time, I started to worry. By the fourth time, I was scared. I decided to stop at the rest area and to try to figure this out. Maybe if I got out and walked around, clear my head, things would go back to normal. I pulled into the parking lot and shut off my engine. The place was completely empty. No other cars, no other trucks, nobody using the facilities. The vending machines were old models that looked like they hadn't been serviced in years. One was selling Coke in bottles for 50 cents. The other had candy bars I hadn't seen since I was a kid. I tried my cell phone again. Still no signal. I walked over to the pay phone near the restrooms, but when I picked up the receiver, there was no dial tone. Just silence. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The restroom building looked newer than it should have. The concrete was too clean, the paint too fresh. But the style was all wrong, like it had been built in the 1970s, but with brand new materials. I got back in my truck and continued driving. What else could I do? Maybe this was some kind of weird dream. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and my brain was playing tricks on me. But the steering wheel felt real under my hands. The diesel engine sounded normal. The gauges all showed what they should show, except for one thing. My fuel gauge hadn't moved. I'd been driving for over an hour, but the needle was pointing to exactly the same spot it had been when I first passed mile marker 237. That was impossible. My truck burns about 7 miles per gallon, and I'd covered the same 10-mile stretch at least 6 times. I should have used up at least 8 or 9 gallons. But the gauge showed I still had 3/4 of tank. Mile marker 237 came up again. And again. Each time, I checked my watch, my odometer, my GPS. According to all my instruments, I was making progress. The GPS showed me moving west along the interstate. The odometer was adding miles. But the scenery never changed. By 1 a.m., I'd passed that same mile marker 12 times. I'd seen Big Mike's billboard 12 times. I'd driven past that rest area 12 times. But according to my GPS, I was now 100 miles west of where I'd started. That's when I decided to try something different. Instead of driving straight past the rest area, I pulled in and parked. Maybe if I could break the pattern somehow, things would go back to normal. I sat in my cab for exactly 1 hour, engine off, just watching and waiting. Nothing happened. No other vehicles passed by. No sounds except the wind rustling through the trees. When I checked my cell phone, it still showed no signal. When I looked at my GPS, it showed I was parked at the rest area, but the location was listed as being 100 miles west of where the rest area actually was. At 2 a.m., I started driving again. Within 10 minutes, I was looking at mile marker 237 once more. I tried driving slower. I tried driving faster. I tried taking the next exit, but there was no next exit. According to my map, there should have been an off-ramp for Highway 64 about 15 miles past mile marker 237, but I never reached it. I just kept looping back to the same 10-mile stretch of road. By 3 a.m., I was starting to panic. I've been trapped on this piece of highway for 4 hours. My fuel gauge still showed 3/4 full, which was impossible. My GPS said I was making progress, but I kept seeing the same landmarks over and over. That's when I started experimenting. I tried honking my horn as I passed mile marker 237. The sound echoed normally. I tried flashing my headlights. They worked fine. I even tried throwing an empty coffee cup out the window as I passed Big Mike's billboard. 10 minutes later, when I came around again, the coffee cup was lying on the shoulder right where I'd thrown it. I stopped the truck and got out to pick up the cup. As I bent down to grab it, I noticed something else. There were tire tracks in the dirt on the shoulder. Fresh tire tracks that matched my truck's tires. But they weren't just from this pass. There were multiple sets overlapping each other. Like I'd stopped in this exact spot many times before. But I knew I'd only stopped once. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just repeating the same stretch of road. I was repeating the same time. Somehow, I was stuck in a loop that reset itself every time I reached the end of the 10-mile section. I got back in my truck and tried something new. Instead of continuing west when I reached the end of the loop, I put the truck in reverse and started backing up. Maybe I could break out of the pattern by going the wrong direction. But as soon as I started backing up, everything went black. Not like someone turned off the lights. More like the world just disappeared. I couldn't see my dashboard, couldn't see my hands in front of my face, couldn't see anything at all. Then, suddenly, my headlights were shining on mile marker 237 again. And there was Big Mike's billboard, right where it had always been. I don't know how long I was trapped on that highway. My watch said it was 4:23 a.m. when I finally saw mile marker 238 appear in my headlights. But according to my logbook, I should have been there hours earlier. The rest of my trip was normal. I delivered my load on time, picked up a backhaul, and drove home without any problems. But I can't stop thinking about those missing hours. My GPS showed that I'd traveled the correct distance. My fuel gauge went back to normal, burning gas at the usual rate. Even my cell phone started working again once I got past mile marker 240. I've driven that stretch of Interstate 43 times since then, and it's always been normal. Mile markers in the right order, exits where they should be, no problems at all. I even looked for Big Mike's all-night eats, but I never found it. There's no billboard, no truck stop, no diner by that name anywhere along that route. Sometimes I wonder if I'm going crazy. Maybe I fell asleep and dreamed the whole thing. But I still have that coffee cup I threw out the window. It's sitting on my dashboard right now. A reminder that some roads don't always take you where you think you're going. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through unfamiliar territory, I find myself checking the mile markers a little more carefully. Because you never know when the road might decide to keep you right where you are. My headlights barely cut 10 feet into the gray wall ahead of me when I saw the first car. It was a 1957 Chevy Bel Air, powder blue with chrome bumpers that gleamed despite the thick fog. The woman behind the wheel wore a dress that looked like something from an old movie, her hair styled in perfect curls. She turned to look at me as I passed, and her eyes were completely white. The name's Hank, and I've been driving these interstates for 18 years. Today I'm telling you a story about a fog bank that shouldn't have existed and the things I saw driving through it. Things that made me question everything I thought I knew about the road. It started on a clear Thursday night in October. I was hauling a load of electronics from Portland to Atlanta, making good time on Interstate 84 through Oregon. The weather was perfect, not a cloud in the sky, stars shining bright, visibility for miles in every direction. I checked the forecast before leaving, and there was no mention of fog anywhere along my route. That's what made it so strange when I saw the wall of gray stretching across the highway ahead of me. At first, I thought it might be smoke from a forest fire. We'd had a dry summer, and brush fires weren't uncommon in that part of the country. But as I got closer, I could tell it was fog. Thick, dense fog that rose from the ground like a solid wall. The weird thing was how perfectly it was contained. The fog didn't gradually thicken or fade at the edges like normal fog does. It was like someone had drawn a line across the highway and said, "Fog starts here." One moment I was driving in clear air, and the next moment I was swallowed up in gray mist so thick I could barely see my own hood. I slowed down to about 30 miles per hour and turned on my fog lights. The air was so dense that my headlights just bounced back at me, creating a ghostly glow that didn't help much with visibility. I'd driven through plenty of fog before, but nothing like this. That's when I saw the Chevy. It appeared out of nowhere, cruising along in the right lane like it was a perfectly normal day. The car looked like it had just rolled off a showroom floor 50 years ago. Everything about it was too perfect. The paint too shiny, the chrome too bright, no rust or anywhere on the body. I eased into the left lane to pass, and that's when the woman looked at me. Her face was pale as milk, and when she turned toward my truck, I could see that her eyes had no pupils. Just solid white like cataracts, but somehow I knew she could see me perfectly. She smiled and waved, a friendly gesture that sent chills down my spine. I pressed harder on the accelerator, wanting to get past the Chevy as quickly as possible. But the car kept pace with me, matching my speed exactly. When I slowed down, it slowed down. When I sped up, it sped up. The woman never stopped smiling, never stopped staring at me with those terrible white eyes. Finally, I managed to pull ahead and lose sight of the car in my mirrors. But my relief didn't last long. Within minutes, I encountered another vehicle. This time it was a pickup truck from the 1960s, faded red paint and a dented tailgate. The man driving it wore overalls and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Like the woman in the Chevy, he turned to stare at me as I passed. His eyes were the same solid white, and his mouth was hanging open like he was trying to speak, but no words would come out. Then came a station wagon from the 1970s with paneling on the sides, a family of four inside. All of them turned to watch me drive by. All of them had those same empty white eyes. The children in the back seat pressed their faces against the windows, their mouths moving silently. I grabbed my CB radio and tried to call for help. Breaker 19, this is eastbound Hank in the red Freightliner. Anyone copy? Static answered me. I tried switching channels, but every frequency was dead. Even my cell phone showed no signal, which was impossible on a major interstate. The fog seemed to be getting thicker. My speedometer said I was doing 40, but it felt like I was crawling. Time seemed to slow down, each mile taking forever to pass. My GPS had stopped working, the screen showing nothing but a gray area with no roads or landmarks. More cars appeared out of the mist. A muscle car from the late 60s with a teenager behind the wheel, his hair slicked back with pomade. A sedan from the 40s with an elderly couple inside, both wearing formal clothes like they were heading to church. A motorcycle with a rider in leather gear that looked like it belonged in a 1950s movie. Every single person turned to look at me. Every single pair of eyes was that same terrifying white. But the most disturbing thing wasn't their appearance, it was how they drove. All of these vehicles were moving at exactly the same speed, maintaining perfect formation like they were part of some invisible convoy. They never passed each other, never changed lanes, never varied their pace. They just drove through the fog in complete silence. I tried honking my horn to see if any of them would react. The sound echoed strangely in the fog, seeming to come from all directions at once. A few of the drivers turned their heads toward me, but none of them changed their driving patterns. That's when I realized something that made my stomach turn. None of these vehicles had their headlights on. They were driving through fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead, but their cars had no lights at all. Yet somehow they could see perfectly well. I'd been driving through the fog for over an hour when I saw the semi-truck. It was an old Peterbilt, probably from the 1980s, painted green with rust spots along the fenders. The driver was wearing a flannel shirt and a trucker cap, his hands gripping the steering well like his life depended on it. When he saw me in the next lane, his mouth opened in what looked like a scream, but no sound came out. Unlike the other drivers, this one didn't have white eyes. His eyes were normal, brown, and very much alive, and they were filled with absolute terror. He was frantically pointing ahead, trying to warn me about something. His lips were moving rapidly, and I could tell he was shouting, but I couldn't hear anything over the rumble of my own engine. I rolled down my window and tried to listen, but all I heard was silence. Not even the sound of his truck's engine, which should have been loud enough to hear from that distance. The trucker kept pointing ahead and mouthing words I couldn't understand. Then he held up a small chalkboard, the kind drivers sometimes used to communicate with other truckers. Written on it in shaky letters was a single word: run. That's when I saw what he was pointing at. Up ahead, the fog was starting to glow with a strange light. Not the warm yellow of headlights or the red of taillights, but a cold blue glow that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The light was getting brighter as I drove toward it, and I could see shapes moving in the mist. More cars were joining the convoy, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all from different time periods, but all driving in the same eerie formation. The blue light reflected off their chrome and glass, giving everything a ghostly appearance. I pressed harder on the accelerator, trying to get through the fog bank as quickly as possible. But no matter how fast I drove, the wall of mist seemed to stretch on forever. My fuel gauge showed I'd been driving for hours, but that was impossible. Even the thickest fog bank couldn't last more than a few miles. Just when I thought I'd be trapped in that gray world forever, my headlights suddenly broke through into clear air. The fog ended as abruptly as it had begun, like driving through a curtain. One moment I was surrounded by mist and silent vehicles, and the next I was back on a normal highway under a star-filled sky. I pulled over at the first truck stop I could find and checked my logbook. According to my records, I'd only been in the fog for 20 minutes, but my fuel gauge showed I'd burned almost 2 hours worth of diesel. My GPS came back online and showed that I'd somehow covered 60 miles, even though I'd been driving at reduced speed the entire time. I never saw any of those cars again, but sometimes when I'm driving through fog at night, I find myself checking my mirrors more often than usual, because I know that somewhere out there, that convoy is still moving through the mist, and someday I might find myself driving alongside them again. The road has its own rules, and fog can hide more than just the highway ahead. Sometimes it hides things that should have stayed buried in the past, and sometimes it shows you things that make you glad you can't see them clearly. The inspector's clipboard held paperwork for my truck, but the date on the forms was from 1987, and the driver's name wasn't mine. It was supposed to be a routine inspection at a 24-hour weigh station on Interstate 75 in Georgia. I'd been through this same facility dozens of times before, but when I climbed out of my cab that night and looked around, nothing was the way I remembered it. My name's Rusty, and I've been hauling freight up and down the eastern seaboard for 14 years. Today I'm telling you a story about a weigh station that existed in the wrong time and an inspection that nearly cost me more than just a few hours of driving time. I was running a load of farm equipment from Alabama to Virginia, making decent time despite some construction delays in Atlanta. It was just past midnight when I saw the sign for the Tifton weigh station. The electronic board showed open, all trucks must enter, so I slowed down and pulled into the inspection lanes. The first thing I noticed was that the building looked different. I'd been through this weigh station many times, and it was always a modern concrete structure with big windows and digital displays. But the building I was looking at seemed older, smaller, with yellow brick walls and narrow windows that glowed with warm incandescent light instead of the usual fluorescent glare. The weigh scales themselves were wrong too. Instead of the electronic drive-on scales I was used to, these were the old mechanical type with analog dials and gauges. The kind they stopped using in most places back in the 1990s. But they looked brand new, like they'd just been installed. I pulled my truck onto the scales and waited for the weight reading. Through my windshield, I could see an inspector walking toward me from the building. He was wearing a uniform I didn't recognize, a brown shirt and pants with patches that didn't match any state agency I'd ever seen. His clipboard was one of those old metal ones with a clip at the top, not the electronic tablets most inspectors use nowadays. The inspector knocked on my passenger door, and I rolled down the window. "Evening, driver. Routine inspection tonight. Can I see your logbook, registration, and medical card?" His voice sounded strange, like it was coming from far away, even though he was standing right next to my truck. I handed him my documents through the window. That's when I noticed the paperwork on his clipboard. The top sheet was a vehicle inspection form, but it was filled out for a 1987 Peterbilt with a completely different license plate number. The driver's name was listed as Tommy Kendrick, and the cargo was shown as agricultural machinery. "Excuse me," I said, "but I think you've got the wrong paperwork there. My name's Rusty, and I'm driving a 2019 Freightliner." The inspector looked at his clipboard, then at me, then back at his clipboard. His face was expressionless, like he hadn't heard what I said. "Step out of the vehicle, Mr. Kendrick. We need to do a complete inspection." "My name's not Kendrick," I said, but he was already walking toward the back of my trailer. I climbed out of my cab and followed him. The inspector began his walk around, checking my lights, tires, and trailer connections. But he was using equipment I hadn't seen in years. An old-style creeper to look under the trailer, a manual tire gauge instead of the digital one, and a flashlight that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Your left rear trailer tire is showing some wear," he said, making notes on his clipboard. "Might want to keep an eye on that." I looked at the tire he was pointing at. It was brand new, with full tread depth. I just had all my trailer tires replaced a week before. "That tire's new," I said. "There's no wear on it at all." The inspector looked at me with empty eyes. "Says here it needs attention. I've got to write it up." He continued his inspection, finding problems that didn't exist and writing citations for violations that weren't there. According to his clipboard, my load was overweight, my logbook was out of compliance, and my truck had multiple safety violations. None of it was true, but he kept writing. Wait a minute, I said. This is all wrong. My truck passed a full DOT inspection just last month. Everything's legal and up to code. The inspector stopped writing and looked at me. For the first time, his expression changed. He looked confused, like he was trying to remember something important. You're not Tommy Kendrick, he said slowly. No, I'm not. My name's Rusty. I drive for Midwest Transport. This is my truck, and these are my documents. The inspector stared at his clipboard for a long moment. When he looked up again, his eyes seemed clearer, more focused. What year is it? He asked. 2024, I said. It's October 15th, 2024. The inspector's face went pale. He looked around the way station like he was seeing it for the first time. This isn't right, he whispered. This isn't right at all. What do you mean? I've been waiting for Tommy Kendrick. He was supposed to come through here with a load of farm equipment. He paused, trying to remember. That was in 1987, October 15th, 1987. A chill ran down my spine. That's 37 years ago. I know, the inspector said. I know that now, but I've been here waiting for him. Every night, the same inspection, the same paperwork. Waiting for Tommy to show up so I could finish my job. What happened to Tommy Kendrick? The inspector looked at his clipboard again. There was an accident, about 5 miles south of here. His truck went off the road during a thunderstorm. They found him the next morning. He paused. I was supposed to inspect his truck that night, but he never made it here. I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare. Are you telling me you've been here for 37 years, waiting to inspect a truck that crashed before it got here? I guess so. Tom doesn't work the same way when you're... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. When you're what? When you're dead. The words hung in the air between us. I looked around the way station again, really seeing it this time. The building that looked too old, the equipment that belonged in a museum, the inspector who seemed to exist in the wrong decade. It all made a terrible kind of sense. I need to go, I said, backing toward my truck. Wait, the inspector called after me. You're carrying farm equipment, just like Tommy was supposed to. Maybe if I inspect your load, I can finally finish my job. Maybe I can finally rest. I stopped. There was something in his voice that made me feel sorry for him. This man had been trapped here for decades, trying to complete a task that could never be finished. Okay, I said. Go ahead and inspect my truck. Do whatever you need to do. The inspector's face showed relief. He walked around my trailer, checking every detail with care and precision. He crawled under the truck, tested every light, examined every tire. When he was finished, he filled out his clipboard with neat, careful handwriting. Everything looks good, he said. Your truck passes inspection. Drive safely out there. As soon as he said those words, the way station began to change. The old brick building started to fade, becoming transparent like a ghost. The mechanical scales dissolved into mist. The inspector himself became harder to see, like he was made of smoke. Thank you, he said, his voice growing fainter. I can go home now. Within moments, the old way station was gone completely. In its place stood the modern concrete building I remembered, with its digital displays and electronic scales. Everything was back to normal. I climbed in my truck and drove away, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. When I got home, I looked up the records for that stretch of highway. Sure enough, there had been a fatal accident on October 15th, 1987. A truck driver named Tommy Kendrick had crashed during a thunderstorm just 5 miles south of the Tifton Way station. The newspaper article mentioned that Kendrick had been scheduled for a routine inspection that night, but never arrived at the station. The inspector on duty had waited all night for him to show up. That inspector's name was Officer Dale Morrison. According to the article, Morrison died of a heart attack 3 months later, still on duty at the same way station where he'd waited for Tommy Kendrick. I've driven past that way station many times since then, and it's always been normal. Modern equipment, living inspectors, routine procedures. But sometimes, late at night, when the highways are empty, I wonder if there are other places like that. Other people trapped in time, waiting to finish jobs that can never be completed. The road's full of ghosts, and sometimes they just need someone to help them find their way home. All it takes is a little kindness and the willingness to let them do their job one last time. The GPS voice kept saying, in 1 mile, take exit 19, but I'd already taken exit 19 7 times, and the fuel gauge was dropping faster each time I tried to ignore it. Every trucker knows that sinking feeling when your tank gets low and you're not sure if you'll make it to the next fuel stop. But what I experienced on Interstate 70 in Kansas was something else entirely. A nightmare loop where the only way to get fuel was through an exit that led nowhere, and the only way to leave was to run out of gas trying. My name's Wade, and I've been running long haul for 16 years. Today I'm telling you a story about an exit that shouldn't exist and a gas station that changes every time you visit it. A story about being trapped between empty and full, with nowhere to go but around in circles. It started during a routine run from Denver to St. Louis. I was hauling auto parts, making good time across Kansas on a clear Tuesday afternoon. My fuel gauge showed just under a quarter tank, enough to reach the next major truck stop about 40 miles ahead. I made this run dozens of times before and knew every exit, every rest area, every place to get fuel along the way. That's why I was confused when my GPS started announcing an exit I'd never heard of. In 2 miles, take exit 19 for fuel and services. I looked at my map book. There was no exit 19 on this stretch of I-70. The exits went from 17 to 22, skipping 19 entirely. I'd driven this route so many times I could navigate in my sleep, and there had never been an exit 19 here. But my fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should have been. What had been a quarter tank 10 minutes ago was now showing less than an eighth. Either I had a fuel leak or my gauge was malfunctioning. Either way, I needed to find a gas station soon. In 1 mile, take exit 19 for fuel and services. I squinted ahead and saw the exit sign. Sure enough, there was a green highway sign marking exit 19, with symbols for fuel, food, and lodging. The exit ramp curved off to the right, disappearing behind a low hill. With my fuel gauge dropping toward empty, I didn't have much choice. I took the exit. The off-ramp led to a Tulane County road that stretched across flat farmland. About a mile down the road, I saw a gas station, an old-style place with 2 pumps under a metal canopy and a small building with a neon sign that read Pete Stop and Go. I pulled up to the diesel pump and climbed out of my cab. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The pumps were old mechanical models with analog displays, and the building had that weathered look of a business that had seen better days. I tried to start the pump, but nothing happened. The display was dark, and there were no lights on inside the building. The open sign was switched off, and when I tried the door, it was locked. Great. The one gas station for miles around, and it was closed. I got back in my truck and continued down the county road, hoping to find another station or at least a way back to the interstate. But the road just kept going straight across empty farmland. No other businesses, no intersections, no signs of civilization at all. After about 10 miles, the road curved to the left and started heading back toward what I thought was the interstate. Sure enough, I saw the on-ramp ahead with a sign pointing toward I-70 east and west. I merged back onto the highway and checked my fuel gauge. Still showing less than an eighth of a tank. But at least I was back on my route, heading toward the truck stop 40 miles ahead. That's when my GPS spoke up again. In 1 mile, take exit 19 for fuel and services. I looked ahead, and there was the same exit sign, the same off-ramp curving away to the right. But that was impossible. I'd just taken exit 19 and gotten back on the highway. How could I be approaching it again? I decided to skip the exit this time and push on to the next fuel stop. But as I passed the exit ramp, my fuel gauge dropped noticeably. What had been an eighth of a tank suddenly showed almost empty. Within 5 miles, my low fuel warning light came on. Within 10 miles, my engine started to stutter. I had no choice but to turn around and head back to exit 19. The exit was still there, leading to the same county road and the same gas station. But this time, Pete's Stop and Go was open. The neon sign was glowing. Lights were on inside the building, and a middle-aged man in coveralls was standing by the pumps. "Afternoon," he said as I climbed out of my cab. "Diesel, right?" "Yeah," I said. "Fill it up, please." He started the pump and began filling my tank. "Don't get many big rigs through here," he said. "Most truckers stick to the interstate." "About that," I said. "How do I get back to I-70? I came down this road from the exit, but I couldn't find my way back." The man looked confused. "Exit? There's no exit near here. This road doesn't connect to the interstate." "But I just came from exit 19. "Son, there ain't no exit 19 on I-70. Never has been." My stomach started to sink. "Then how did I get here?" "Beats me," he said, finishing with the fuel. "That'll be $247.50. I paid him and asked for directions back to the interstate. He pointed down the county road in the opposite direction from where I'd come. "Follow this road about 8 miles, then turn left at the grain elevator. That'll take you to Highway 40, which connects to I-70 about 15 miles east of here." I followed his directions, driving through more empty farmland until I reached the grain elevator. I turned left onto another county road, which eventually led to Highway 40. From there, I found my way back to I-70 and continued towards St. Louis. But 20 miles down the highway, my GPS started acting up again. Recalculating route. In 2 miles, take exit 19 for fuel and services. I looked at my fuel gauge. It was showing less than a quarter tank, even though I just filled up. That was impossible. My truck held 200 gallons, and I just put in a full tank. In 1 mile, take exit 19 for fuel and services. There was the exit sign again. The same off-ramp, the same curve to the right. But my fuel gauge was dropping fast, and I could feel my engine starting to lose power. I took the exit again. This time, Pete's Stop and Go was different. The building was newer, with modern pumps and a convenience store inside. The man working there was younger, wearing a company uniform instead of coveralls. "Help you?" he asked. "Diesel fill up?" I said. "And can you tell me how to get back to I-70? I-70? That's about 30 miles from here. You want to take Route 36, north to Highway 183, then east to the interstate." I filled up again and followed his directions. The route was completely different from what the previous attendant had told me, leading through a small town I'd never seen before. But eventually, I made it back to I-70. This pattern continued for the next 4 hours. Every time I tried to skip exit 19, my fuel would run dangerously low, forcing me to take the exit. Every time I took the exit, the gas station was different, sometimes old, sometimes new, sometimes closed, sometimes open. The attendants were different people with different directions for getting back to the highway. But no matter which route I took back to I-70, I always ended up approaching exit 19 again with low fuel. By the 6th time around, I was starting to panic. I've been driving in circles for hours, burning through tank after tank of diesel, but never getting any closer to my destination. My GPS showed that I was making progress along I-70, but somehow I kept ending up at the same exit. The 7th time I took exit 19, Pete's Stop and Go was closed again. But this time, there was a note on the door. "Wade, we know what you're going through. The only way out is to refuse to take the exit, even if it means running out of fuel. Trust us." The management. That note had my name on it. Someone knew I was trapped here. The 8th time my GPS announced exit 19, I made a decision. I was going to ignore it, even if my truck ran out of fuel on the highway. I passed the exit ramp and kept driving, watching my fuel gauge drop toward empty. 5 miles past the exit, my engine started to stutter. 10 miles past, my low fuel light came on. 15 miles past, my engine began to cough and hesitate. Just when I thought my truck was going to die on the side of the highway, I saw a sign ahead. Truck stop. Next exit. It wasn't exit 19. It was the truck stop I'd been trying to reach all along. I coasted into the fuel island on fumes and filled up my tank. According to my GPS, I was exactly where I should be, right on schedule. It was like the last 4 hours had never happened. I never saw exit 19 again. I've driven that stretch of I-70 dozens of times since then, and the exits still go from 17 to 22, just like they always did. But sometimes when my fuel gets low and I'm looking for a place to stop, I hear my GPS say something that makes my blood run cold. In 1 mile, take exit 19 for fuel and services. When that happens, I keep driving no matter how low my fuel gets. Because I learned that some exits don't take you where you want to go. They take you where you're afraid to be. And sometimes the only way out is to have faith that the road ahead is better than the exit that promises to save you. Your wife Martha makes a great apple pie, the stranger said from my passenger seat, even though I'd never told him I was married, and my wife's name isn't Martha. I'd picked him up 20 miles back when I saw him standing next to his broken-down rig on the shoulder of Interstate 40 in New Mexico. His truck was a mess, steam pouring from under the hood, hazard lights flashing, the whole scene that every trucker dreads. When someone's stranded on the highway, you help them out. It's the code of the road. But now, sitting in my cab as we rolled through the desert night, this guy was saying things he shouldn't know. My name's Colt, and I've been driving these highways for 19 years. Today I'm telling you a story about a hitchhiker who knew too much and truck stops that closed their doors every time we tried to stop. A story about the difference between helping someone out and letting something dangerous into your cab. The guy looked normal enough when I pulled over to help him. Middle-aged, wearing a faded denim shirt and work boots, trucker cap pulled low over his face. He had that weathered look that comes from years on the road. And when he climbed into my passenger seat, he smelled like diesel fuel and cigarettes. Much obliged, he said as I pulled back onto the highway. Name's Earl. Radiator blew about 10 miles back. Gonna be expensive to fix. Where you headed? I asked. Phoenix, he said. Same as you, I guess. I hadn't told him where I was going. But Phoenix was a major freight hub, and most trucks on this stretch of I-40 were heading there, so it wasn't hard to guess. What kind of load you carry? Earl asked, settling back in his seat. Auto parts, I said. You? Electronics. Computers and such. High-value stuff. He paused. Of course, that don't matter much now with my truck sitting dead on the roadside. We drove in comfortable silence for a while. Earl seemed like a decent guy. Polite, quiet, the kind of driver you wouldn't mind sharing a meal with at a truck stop. But as the miles passed, he started making comments that bothered me. That exit coming up has a good truck stop, he said, pointing ahead. The pilot station. They got showers that actually work, and the coffee's fresh most of the time. I looked at the exit sign. It was for a small town I'd never heard of, and according to my truck stop guide, there was no pilot station there. Just a couple of gas stations and a McDonald's. You sure about that? I asked. Oh yeah, Earl said. Been stopping there for years. The manager's a guy named Steve. Real friendly. Keeps the place clean. When we reached the exit, I could see he was wrong. There was no pilot station, just like my guide had said. But Earl didn't seem surprised when I kept driving. A few miles later, he mentioned another truck stop that didn't exist. Then he started talking about my route, describing rest areas and way stations along roads I hadn't told him I was taking. That way station about 50 miles ahead, he said. They're usually pretty quick with inspections. Officer Rodriguez runs a tight ship, but he's fair. I'd been through that way station many times, and there was no Officer Rodriguez. The inspectors, there were Johnson and Martinez, and they'd been working that station for years. That's when Earl mentioned my wife. Your wife, Martha, makes a great apple pie, he said casually, like we'd been talking about my family. Bet you miss her cooking when you're on the road. My wife's name is Linda, not Martha, and she can't cook to save her life. We joke about it all the time. She burns everything, even toast. My wife's name is Linda, I said carefully. Earl looked confused for a moment, like he was trying to remember something. Right, Linda. Sorry. Long day. Sometimes the names get mixed up. Mixed up with what? Nothing, he said quickly. Just tired, I guess. But the weird comments kept coming. He talked about my kids, even though Linda and I don't have children. He mentioned my dog, even though we have a cat. He described my house as a 2-story colonial when it's actually a ranch-style bungalow. Most disturbing of all, he started talking about my cargo in detail. Those auto parts you're carrying, he said. Transmission components, mostly. Some brake systems. All going to that warehouse on the south side of Phoenix. The one with the blue loading dock. I was hauling auto parts, but they were engine components, not transmissions. And my delivery was to a dealership on the north side of town, not a warehouse with a blue loading dock. How do you know about my cargo? I asked. Lucky guess, Earl said, but he was sweating now, despite the air conditioning in my cab. By this time, I was getting seriously creeped out. This guy knew things he shouldn't know, but he was getting the details wrong, like he was remembering information about someone else's life. I need to stop for fuel, I said, even though my tank was still half full. I wanted to get this guy out of my truck. Good idea, Earl said. There's a Flying J at the next exit. Open 24 hours. I knew there was no Flying J at the next exit. But when we got there, I pulled off anyway, hoping to find someplace where I could drop off my unwanted passenger. The exit led to a small town with a few gas stations and a diner. I pulled into the first station I saw, but as soon as I parked, the lights inside the building went out. A sign appeared in the window, closed for maintenance. That's weird, I said. It's only 9 p.m. Try the next station, Earl suggested. The same thing happened at the next station, and the next. Every place we stopped suddenly closed just as we arrived. Lights going out, doors locking, closed signs appearing in windows. Even the diner shut down as soon as I parked in front of it. This is crazy, I said. It's like they're closing just to avoid us. Earl was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded different. Sadder. They're not trying to avoid us, he said. They're trying to avoid me. What do you mean? You ever hear of a driver named Earl Hutchins? The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. Maybe. What? He was driving a load of electronics from Albuquerque to Phoenix about 3 years ago. Picked up a hitchhiker outside of Flagstaff. Guy seemed normal enough, but he started saying strange things. Talking about the driver's family, his cargo, places he'd been. Getting some details right, some details wrong, like he was remembering things from different people's lives. I felt a chill run down my spine. What happened to Earl Hutchins? They found his truck in a ravine about 20 miles outside Phoenix. Looked like he'd swerved off the road, trying to avoid something. Earl was dead, but they never found the hitchhiker. I stared at my passenger. Are you telling me you're Earl Hutchins? No, he said quietly. I'm a hitchhiker, the one who got Earl killed. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. That's impossible. You can't be the same guy. I've been trying to get to Phoenix for 3 years, Earl said. Every time someone picks me up, the same thing happens. I start remembering things about their life, but I get them mixed up with memories from other drivers. I can't help it. And every time, the truck stops close down when we try to stop. Like they know what I am. What are you? I don't know, he said. All I remember is walking along the highway after my truck broke down. Then Earl Hutchins picked me up. Then there was an accident. Then I was walking along the highway again, waiting for the next ride. I was approaching another exit, and I could see the lights of a truck stop ahead. But even from a distance, I could tell it was shutting down. The parking lot lights were going out one by one. "You have to let me out," Earl said, "before the same thing happens to you that happened to Earl Hutchins. What if I don't stop? What if I just keep driving until we reach Phoenix?" "You can't," he said. "Eventually, you'll have to stop for fuel or food or rest. And when you do, you'll see that every place is closed. You'll get frustrated, maybe angry. You'll start driving recklessly, trying to find an open station. And then," he didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Earl Hutchins had died because he'd been driving desperately, trying to find a place that would stay open long enough for him to get rid of his passenger. I pulled over at the next rest area. It was just a parking lot with some picnic tables and restrooms, but at least it was public property. The bathrooms couldn't close. "This is where you get out," I said. Earl nodded sadly. "I'm sorry about this. I don't mean for it to happen. I just want to get home." "Where is home?" "I can't remember," he said. "I think it might be Phoenix. Or maybe Phoenix is just where I was going when everything went wrong." He climbed out of my cab and started walking toward the restrooms. But after a few steps, he stopped and turned back. "Your wife, Linda," he said. "Tell her you love her when you get home. Don't wait. Don't assume she knows." Then he disappeared into the darkness beyond the rest area lights. I sat in my truck for a long time before continuing to Phoenix. When I finally reached my destination and unloaded my cargo, I called Linda immediately. "I love you," I said as soon as she answered. "I love you too," she said. "What's wrong? You sound upset." "Nothing's wrong," I said. "I just wanted you to know." I never told her about Earl, but I think about him sometimes when I'm driving alone at night. Somewhere out there, he's still walking along the highway, waiting for the next driver to stop, still trying to get home, carrying fragments of other people's lives in his memory. The road's a dangerous place, especially for people who are lost. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is try to help someone find their way. Because some passengers carry more baggage than you can handle, and some destinations are impossible to reach. The silence hit like a wall at mile marker 247, cutting off my country music mid-song, and in that dead quiet, I heard my own voice coming through the speakers saying, "Dispatch, this is Rex. I'm about 30 miles out from Bakersfield. Should be there in 40 minutes. But I was still 3 hours away from Bakersfield, and I hadn't called dispatch in over 2 hours. The radio kept playing my voice, having conversations I'd never had, reporting my location hours before I'd actually reach those places. And in the spaces between my phantom transmissions, I could hear something else, the sound of my truck engine, recorded from somewhere I'd never been. My name's Rex, and I've been running freight across the western states for 17 years. Today I'm telling you a story about a stretch of highway where all the radios go silent, and the only voice you hear is your own, echoing back from a future that hasn't happened yet. I was hauling a load of construction equipment from Las Vegas to Sacramento, running Highway 58 through the Mojave Desert on a Thursday afternoon in November. It's a lonely stretch of road, even on the best days. Nothing but sand, scrub brush, and mountains in the distance. Most drivers stick to the interstates, but I like the back roads. Less traffic, better scenery, and usually no problems. The radio had been working fine all day. I've been listening to a classic rock station out of Bakersfield, occasionally switching to the CB to check in with other drivers. My satellite radio was picking up signals clearly, and my cell phone showed full bars. Then I hit mile marker 247, and everything went dead. Not gradually, like when you're driving out of range of a station. All at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The music stopped mid-note. The CB went to static. Even my satellite radio, which should work anywhere, showed no signal. I tried switching channels, adjusting the antenna, checking connections. Nothing. Every radio in my truck, AM, FM, CB, satellite, even the emergency weather band, was completely silent. That's when I heard my own voice. Dispatch. This is Rex and Truck 447. I'm about 30 miles out from Bakersfield. Should be there in 40 minutes. The voice was coming through my CB radio, clear as day. It was definitely my voice with my truck number and my speech patterns. But I was nowhere near Bakersfield. According to my GPS, I was still over 3 hours away from my delivery point. I key my CB mic, hello? This is Rex. Who was that talking? Silence. Not even static. A few minutes later, my voice came through the speakers again. This is Rex checking in. Just passed through Tehachapi. Traffic's light, making good time. Tehachapi was on my route, but it was still 2 hours ahead of where I actually was. I wouldn't reach that town until late afternoon, but according to the radio transmission, I was already there. I tried calling dispatch on my cell phone, but there was no signal. The phone showed full bars, but when I tried to make a call, it just said call failed every time. For the next hour, I drove through the dead radio zone, listening to my own voice report my progress along the route. Each transmission placed me further ahead than I actually was, like I was listening to myself from the future. Rex to base. Just hit the Grapevine. Should be in Bakersfield in about 20 minutes. The Grapevine was the mountain pass leading into the Central Valley. I wouldn't reach it for another hour and a half. This is Rex. Delivered the load, picked up the backhaul. Heading back toward Vegas on Highway 58. That transmission really spooked me. I hadn't even reached my delivery point yet, but apparently future me had already completed the job and was heading home. The strangest part was that I could hear background noise in the transmissions. The sound of my truck's engine, road noise, even the specific rattle from my passenger door that I'd been meaning to fix for months. It was like listening to recordings of conversations I hadn't had yet. As I continued driving, the phantom transmission started including details I couldn't have known. Rex to dispatch. That construction site on 5th Street in Bakersfield is a mess. Took me an extra 20 minutes to get through traffic. You might want to warn other drivers. I'd never been to 5th Street in Bakersfield. I didn't even know if there was construction there. But my voice on the radio sounded like I'd just dealt with the traffic jam personally. This is Rex. Stop for fuel at the Flying J on Highway 99. Diesel's running $4.89 a gallon here. Little high, but the place is clean. Again, I'd never been to that truck stop, but my voice was giving a detailed report like I just filled up there. The transmissions kept coming, describing my entire route in reverse order. I heard myself report leaving Sacramento, then Stockton, then Modesto, working backward through cities I hadn't visited yet. Each transmission sounded normal, like routine check-ins with dispatch, but they were describing events that were still hours in my future. What really disturbed me was that some of the transmissions included conversations with dispatch that I'd never had. Rex, this is dispatch. How's that new load of steel beams riding? Riding fine, dispatch. No problems with weight distribution. Should have it delivered on schedule. But I wasn't carrying steel beams. My load was construction equipment, bulldozers and excavators. And I'd never talked to dispatch about weight distribution issues. Rex, be advised there's a vehicle fire on Highway 58 eastbound at mile marker 195. CHP has traffic down to 1 lane. Copy that, dispatch. I'll watch for delays. Mile marker 195 was about 50 miles behind me. If there had been a vehicle fire there, I should have seen it when I passed through. But the road had been clear. As the afternoon wore on, the phantom transmission started, including conversations with other drivers. Rex, This is Bulldozer Bob on Channel 17. You still running that old Peterbilt? Hey, Bob. Yeah, still got the Pete. She's getting up there in miles, but she runs good. I never heard of anyone called Bulldozer Bob, and I drive a Freightliner, not a Peterbilt. Rex, this is Highway Hannah. Thanks for the heads up about that speed trap near Mojave. Save me a ticket. No problem, Hannah. We gotta look out for each other. I hadn't warned anyone about a speed trap because I hadn't seen one, but my voice on the radio sounded like I'd just done a favor for a fellow driver. The most disturbing transmission came around 4 p.m. Mayday, Mayday, this is Rex and Truck 447. I've got brake failure coming down the grapevine. Can't slow down. Need emergency assistance. My blood ran cold. The grapevine was a steep mountain grade where runaway trucks were a real danger. If my brakes failed on that hill, it could be fatal. But I was still an hour away from the grapevine, and my brakes were working fine. This is CHP Dispatch. Rex, what's your exact location? About 2 miles down from the brake check area. Speeds up to 70 and climbing. Looking for a runaway truck ramp. I grabbed my CB mic. This is Rex. I'm not on the grapevine. My brakes are fine. This is some kind of mistake. Silence. The emergency continued to play out over my radio. Rex, there's a runaway ramp about half a mile ahead on your right. I see it, trying to make the turn. Then I heard the sound of screeching metal, breaking glass, and my own voice screaming. The transmission cut to static. I was shaking so badly I had to pull over. According to the radio, I just died in a truck accident that hadn't happened yet. But I was still alive, still sitting safely on the shoulder of Highway 58. I sat there for 20 minutes trying to figure out what was going on. Was I listening to some kind of recording? A radio drama? But it was my voice, my truck number, my route. Finally, I started driving again. I had a delivery to make, and sitting on the roadside wasn't going to solve anything. An hour later, I reached the approach to the grapevine. I tested my brakes carefully before starting down the grade. They worked perfectly. I descended the mountain without any problems, maintaining safe speed all the way down. At the bottom of the hill, I stopped at the brake check area to inspect my truck. Everything looked normal. No signs of brake problems, no worn pads, no fluid leaks. Whatever I'd heard on the radio, it wasn't real. But as I was checking my brakes, another driver walked over. "You Rex?" he asked. "Yeah. Glad to see you made it down okay. Heard on the radio that you had brake problems up there." "What radio transmission?" "About an hour ago. You called a mayday, said your brakes were out. Then the transmission cut off. We all thought." He looked relieved. "Well, glad you're okay." Other drivers had heard the same phantom transmission. To them, it was real. They thought I'd crashed on the grapevine. I completed my delivery in Bakersfield and picked up my backhaul load, just like the radio transmissions had described. But I took a different route home, avoiding Highway 58 and the dead radio zone. I never figured out what caused those phantom transmissions. Maybe it was some kind of atmospheric phenomenon that bounced radio signals through time. Maybe it was equipment malfunction. Or maybe some stretches of highway exist in more than one timeline, where past and future bleed through into the present. All I know is that somewhere in the Mojave Desert, there's a place where radios don't work the way they should, where you can hear your own voice describing events that haven't happened yet. And sometimes those events are things you don't want to come true. I still drive through that area occasionally, but I always make sure my radios are turned off when I hit mile marker 247, because some conversations are better left unheard, especially when you're talking to yourself from a future you might not want to live.